Sounds simple, sounds easy. Diversity and inclusion is the right thing to do. It has a business impact. Why is it so difficult? Or why is it sometimes a challenge? It's because we will see it. Our nature and the way our brain works is not always open to the differences. And it's absolutely normal. And we will see it later on. So I have a specific bias because I was once at a dinner and there was the mother of a friend of mine. She was 70 years plus. And I thought the whole time that she has never worked. Until I realized in the conversation that she was on the board of the major French companies. So I was really feeling ridiculous. But it was not the end of the world. It didn't have a big impact. But sometimes it can have an impact at work. Because if it's a customer, if it's a partner, then the impact might be there. You only realize that you're biased when it happened. So in the situation that I explained or mine before with that lady, I only realized that I had that bias towards maybe elderly women when it happens. So when it happens to you, it's absolutely normal because our brain is coping with so much information that we have to do this kind of shortcuts. So the shortcuts is the images and then we have something in mind, which happened again earlier on. And it's absolutely normal. And depending on your upbringing and your experiences, you will have different shortcuts. And they change by time, depending on the different people you meet, depending on the different experiences. So again, this is what the science tells us. Naturally, our brain is made so that we choose people who are like us and who act like us. And there is nothing bad in this. It's a bit this protection that we have a bit from maybe our ancestor when we were in the cave, when we see something different, it's a bit the danger. So immediately in our brain, when we meet someone, we'll say, is the person in the in or the out group? Again, it's all unconscious, but it's natural. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that so that it is not natural that when we see someone totally different, we're like, oh, great. And we're going to that person because we will first have a bit this distance. So a bias is a preference. It's a kind of, can end into what we call the stereotypes. But it's based on our attitude, on our beliefs and our experiences. It's part of this human evolution. And most of the time, our biases are unconscious. And more importantly, they're unintentional. So very often you find situations where you realize there is a bit of conflict, etc., but it was most of the time not meant like this. But then our behavior is in a way that it might be perceived this way, and this is why the inclusion is important, and we'll talk about it. But most of the time it's really, really unintentional. And it helps to keep this in mind, even if it's not. Bias are important, and especially, as I mentioned, in the business environment, because it impacts our decision-making. Because when we're not reflective enough and we take a decision based on this first shortcut, it might be right, but it might not be. And the not be, you want to pay attention to that in the workspace, in the work environment, when it comes to talents, when it comes to customers, consumers, where you want to avoid to take a decision based on your own shortcuts and then maybe leading to another one. So it's important then to reevaluate that. This is why we're talking about biases in the work environment. For instance, in Switzerland, in the banking industry, most of the people are on unconscious bias because what happened is the people working in the bank industry had an image on how a wealthy person kind of looked like. But the world is changing, so it's maybe the young ones that are having their startups that are the wealthier one. It's maybe more the women, so they were starting to lose deals. So everyone was trained. So when are they coming, the biases? Most of the time they're not coming after a yoga session or when you're coming back from holidays where you're super relaxed. The shortcuts, they are when you're under pressure, when you don't have all the information, when you need to reach out a conclusion, and when you have to draw quickly first impressions, right? There are different types of biases. Here we see the 4 ones, but there are over 100. But the 4 that have an impact is, the first one is the similarity bias. And we know that really well when we recruit. It's like, oh, it reminds me of myself. So it's a bit the mini-me principle. So look at your recruitment history, for instance. If you see that the people you recruited are similar to you, maybe there is a bit of the mini-me. And again, the idea is not to change all, but it's about balance, right? It's maybe to have a bit more different perspective. The second one is around the experience. I think here it's to look at people who have exactly the same experience. And I was recently as well doing a workshop with a team, and they said, it's true. We have absolutely in our mind the experience and the career path that the ideal candidate should have. So therefore, anything that doesn't fit, we will not look at. But they were realizing in that team that, but the things are changing, the expectation also. So we should as well adapt our ideal kind of scenario in our head. The other one is the distance. So very often when we do performance evaluation, we have more in mind what happened just 2 weeks before, and we tend to forget what was longer before. And the fourth is the one that we will tend to reinforce one of the dominant message already, or if one has really this perspective, then we will reinforce it. So there's not a lot of room for challenges. So in 7 seconds, we make 11 impressions of someone. Here you see a picture. Immediately in your mind, you already decide, do I want that person in my team, yes or no? You don't have to answer. Immediately, I would try to guess, what does that person play of a sport? And again, it's normal. Would you have guessed that he's a Paralympic grand slalom skier? If you had experiences in that area, then you would know. And this is what differs us from another. It's the different experiences we have with differences. Another image here. Do you want him in your team? Depending, you will say, oh yes, he's a tech, he's a geek, he's digital, I want him. And another would maybe say, no, not enough experience, not enough gray hair, no, will not be able to manage it. It depends. And this is where we all differ. Would you have guessed that he's one of the startup creators? So this is my bias, right? I would have not guessed this one, for instance. So again, she built her own business. And these are all true stories. Why am I showing this? It's because it is important not to just say, oh, I shouldn't be biased, but to try to test and to know what could be yours. There is a great test on the online, and for free, it's the Howard implicit test, where you can see a bit what are your biases towards gender, towards race, etc. But I think it's more through different experiences that you will realize, yeah, maybe here I have a strong view that maybe in the business will then bring me to certain limits. So I think it's more important to know oneself and to be open to discover them rather than thinking, oh, I have this. So what is happening exactly in our mind when it comes to bias? There is a professor from Harvard University, Chris Aguirre, and the theory behind that is called the ladder of inference. And we will see now how the process of bias is happening in our mind. This is the construct. It's happening really fast. And we will see how it can impact. So here is more a decision where we will evaluate a talent. So the observable data is that Susan speaks once during a meeting. Depending on my biases, my background experience, my beliefs, the ladder will be different. I will make different interpretation, assumptions, and conclusion. Now here in that example, my belief, my background experience is that strong leaders should showcase their view and their opinions, right? Therefore, From the observable data, I will select some data. Susan, let others take over the meeting. She should speak up to provide guidance to her team. She understands the issues well, but she's not assertive enough. She cannot lead a team. She has poor leadership potential. Next time there is a project, we will not give it to Susan because we think she needs to work on assertiveness. This happens super fast, and we come to an impact and a decision. Now let's apply a different filter to the same example. Same observable data. Susan speaks once during a meeting. But now my background experience is different. Strong leaders don't need to overstate their expertise. Therefore, I will select some different data. Susan let her team members showcase the work. She made a very insightful comment. She understands the issues well and she knows how to listen. She's a strong project lead. She has strong leadership potential. Next time there is a job, we'll give it to Susan. See? So this is where the bias has an impact. And this is where conversations are important. Again, this ladder, and I invite you to look at it. There is a great video as well explaining it. It happens really, really fast in our mind. What can we do to minimize it? And specifically in the business environment. The research has shown that if you pause before getting to the decision, you already reduce it a lot. It sounds easy, but again, very often, it's when we immediately go with this conclusion of shortcuts that we come sometimes with not the correct one. So if we pause and think and ask ourselves, what assumption did I make? What are my beliefs? And why did I come to that conclusion? So running up the ladder. This is very helpful. And again, you cannot do that all the time, right? It's when there is an impact, when there is something important at work, where you kind of train yourself to go up to that ladder. The second one is if you review your decision as well to try to maybe revalidate. And this is why we often have meetings that we tend to name calibrate, because we want to see what are the different assumptions and perspective. This already helps. And then it's to suspend some of our certainties. It is to look at things with curiosity and aim for diverse thinking. Now, this is anything but what we do in the business environment, because we ask to be sure, certain, and to do it fast. And here what I'm asking you to do is pause, so take your time, suspend the certainty, be curious. So again, it's anything but natural. And I want to insist on that, because if we do not work on it as a person, nothing will change. So this is why it's very important to train that. And again, you cannot do all the time okay, let's suspend certainties. But in some areas of work or in some moments, it's maybe worth, when you want more creativity, when you want more innovation, when you have a complex problem, to look at things from that perspective.